Christmas 50 years ago was not louder or warmer than you remember. It was quieter, and that silence carried the real weight of the season. There is something about those holidays in America that people who lived through them cannot forget, even if they struggle to explain why. You recall familiar scenes, yet what shaped the experience was the restraint, the patience, and the feeling that nothing had to prove itself. If you were there, you sensed how meaning came from repetition, from shared habits, and from knowing your place within something larger. At the time, Christmas felt less like an event and more like a condition, something you moved through rather than prepared for. Across neighborhoods, the season belonged to everyone without being announced, carried by behavior instead of spectacle. If this quiet version of the past speaks to you, like and subscribe to support keeping these memories visible. Stay close now, because this calm surface hides details that only show themselves when you slow down. A Christmas people never forgot. Back then, Christmas felt larger than the calendar could hold. It stayed in the air long after the day passed. I remember streets glowing early and voices slowing down as if time itself agreed to wait. People often say it was just because we were younger, but that was only part of the story. The deeper reason lived in how the whole country moved together at the same pace. Stores closed earlier, schools softened their rules, evenings belonged to kitchens and living rooms. There was a small detail that said everything. No one rushed to capture the moment because everyone trusted it would return next year. That trust shaped how we stood still without fear. And slowly, without anyone saying it, the season settled in and stayed a little longer each time. When Christmas was simpler and slower. Why did Christmas feel calmer even when houses were full and days were busy? It looked simple, but simplicity was not accidental. Life outside December already moved at a slower rhythm, and the holiday simply followed that pattern. Shops closed earlier. Letters took days. Plans were made without constant updates. But that ease came from something very specific. Families shared fewer options, fewer choices meant fewer decisions to fight over. Even gifts followed this quiet rule. One or two items carried the weight of many hopes. There was a quiet confidence in everyday life that allowed waiting to feel natural. In the background, time kept moving, but it did so gently, like it understood the season. Traditions at their peak. These small traditions explain a lot about why Christmas felt complete. I remember how the same actions returned each year without discussion or debate. Songs came from the same records. Meals followed the same order. Greetings sounded familiar before they were spoken. And that was just the surface. What mattered was that no one tried to improve or replace them. Traditions worked because they were shared by neighbors, schools, churches, and stores at the same time. Few people noticed it, but it shaped daily life. You could step into any home and recognize the rhythm. Quietly, those repeated motions carried us forward, even as the world outside kept shifting. Togetherness over perfection. We did not try to make Christmas perfect, and that was the reason it worked. The rooms were crowded, food sometimes ran late, decorations were uneven. But this was not the full picture. The lack of polish made space for people instead of appearances. No one expected silence or symmetry. Laughter filled the gaps where mistakes lived. At the time, no one realized what this would lead to. Being together mattered more than fixing small flaws. Children watched adults accept moments as they came. In that acceptance, something steady formed. Slowly, in the background, the idea of being present grew stronger than the need to impress. When the Sears Wish Book arrived, the mailbox opened, a thick book landed inside, and the season officially began. I can still feel the weight of it in my hands as pages turned on the living room floor. But that was only part of the story. The wish book worked because it arrived before urgency took over. Children had time to imagine rather than demand. Circles were drawn carefully. Hopes were spaced out across many days. It was not about getting everything. It was about learning how to wait. That waiting trained patience without anyone naming it. Quietly, as winter moved in, anticipation became part of daily life, decorating as a family. There was a quiet warmth in how families decorated together back then. It felt unspoken but steady. I remember hands reaching for the same box year after year, no one rushing ahead. But that closeness came from something very specific. Decorations were limited, so everyone had a role without competition. One person held the ladder, another untangled lights. Someone else simply watched and waited. There was a small detail that said everything. No one worried about style or balance. The room filled slowly as people stayed. That shared pace allowed conversations to wander and return. In the background, evening settled in gently, and the house learned its shape again. Decorating the tree. The tree stood in the corner, bare and quiet, waiting to be claimed. At first it looked unfinished, but that pause mattered. The reason was simple. The tree was not meant to be rushed. Ornaments carried stories, not themes. Each one arrived with a memory already attached. But this was not the full picture. The lights went on last, not for effect, but for timing. When they finally glowed, the room softened without announcement. Few people noticed it, but that moment taught patience. Slowly, as shadows shifted on the wall, the tree became part of the house again. Christmas television as an event. By today's standards, this would feel impossible. Everyone watched the same thing at the same time. Back then, television gathered people instead of pulling them apart. But that magic depended on a shared schedule. Shows aired once. Missing them meant waiting a full year. Families planned evenings around broadcasts. Chairs faced the screen together. And that was just the surface. What mattered was the silence that followed the opening music. No one spoke, because everyone knew this moment would pass quickly. In the background, laughter and quiet pauses synced across neighborhoods, almost without effort. School, in December. There was a small detail in school that said everything about December. Teachers eased their pace, assignments felt lighter, voices softened in hallways. But this kindness came from a clear condition. The calendar itself allowed room to breathe. Decorations appeared on doors. Music drifted between classes. At the time, no one questioned it. School became part of the season rather than an obstacle to it. Few people noticed how rare that balance was. Lessons continued, but urgency stepped aside. Quietly, as days shortened, anticipation followed students home each afternoon. Christmas break and shopping. This was the moment just before everything shifted, though no one named it then. Christmas break opened space while shopping filled it gently. Stores were busy, but not relentless. But that ease came from something very specific. Choices were fewer. Expectations stayed contained. People browsed slowly. Conversations mattered as much as purchases. Lines moved, but no one measured time too closely. There was a quiet confidence in how errands unfolded. Shopping felt like part of the walk, not the destination. In the background, streets hummed softly, carrying everyone toward the same few days ahead. Christmas Eve, traditions, and then it slowed. Christmas Eve carried a different weight, quieter, heavier, almost careful. We followed small rituals without naming them. The same meal, the same walk, the same lights left on a little longer. But that pause existed for a reason. The night was designed for waiting rather than celebrating. Children moved gently. Adults spoke in lower voices. There was a small detail that said everything. Gifts stayed untouched. Presents mattered more than opening anything. The hours stretched without pressure. Slowly, As darkness settled outside, the house seemed to listen along with us. Christmas morning. Morning arrived early. Feet touched the floor before the sun fully rose. The room felt different before anyone spoke, but this feeling did not come from surprise. It came from knowing exactly what would happen next. Stockings were checked first, not because they were biggest, but because that was the order. Wrapping paper tore softly. Laughter stayed contained, and that was just the surface. The real joy lived in recognition rather than shock. Everyone knew the rhythm by heart. Quietly, as light filled the room, the moment passed without needing to be held. Christmas Day with family. There was a calm fullness to Christmas Day that felt steady rather than exciting. The house stayed occupied, but no one rushed to leave or arrive. But that comfort came from something very specific. The day had nowhere else to go. Meals took time, conversations drifted and returned. People sat longer than planned. Few people noticed it, but the absence of schedules shaped everything. Hours blurred without resistance. In the background, plates were cleared slowly, voices softened, and the day rested on itself. Why Christmas felt bigger. This detail helps make sense of why Christmas felt larger than a single day. The season stretched because daily life allowed it to. But this was not accidental. Work paused, school stepped back, evenings opened wide. Attention was not divided into smaller pieces. There was a quiet confidence in letting days breathe. Few people talked about it, yet everyone felt it. The holiday expanded naturally into the spaces around it. Slowly, without effort, Christmas filled the gaps we did not guard so tightly then. Snacks, kitchens, and the smell of the season. I remember stepping into a small kitchen in a quiet neighborhood just as the oven door closed and warm air filled the room. The counter was crowded with tins and paper plates, and hands moved without hurry, as if this scene had happened many times before. It looked simple, but that was only part of the story. The ease came from routines learned over years and from ingredients bought early and stored patiently because nothing was rushed at the last minute. There was a small detail that said everything. The smells stayed longer than the food because kitchens were the center of the house and people lingered there by habit. At the time, no one thought of this as special. It was how evenings slowly unfolded while snow rested outside and radios hummed softly in the background. By today's standards, this kind of waiting would feel unreal. Yet back then, it settled in quietly and carried the season forward without asking for attention. Church, community, and the spirit of togetherness. I remember walking through cold streets toward a small church where lights glowed through narrow windows. Why did these gatherings feel heavier than just tradition back then? It felt familiar. But that feeling came from something very specific. Churches were not only places for prayer, but steady meeting points where neighbors saw each other every week without planning ahead. Few people noticed it, but it shaped daily life. The same faces returned year after year, and trust grew quietly because nothing about it was rushed or curated. Songs were sung slowly and voices blended unevenly, yet no one tried to correct the sound. At the time, no one realized what this would lead to. Those shared moments created a sense of belonging that extended beyond the building and followed people home in the dark. It all continued gently as winter nights deepened and something subtle moved quietly in the background. More history to explore, and that way of living shaped something else. Christmas pointed toward a larger pattern in everyday life, but that pattern depended on shared timing and shared limits. Seasons mattered because they were felt together. Traditions worked because they connected beyond one home. At the time, no one separated holidays from ordinary days. They belonged to the same rhythm. That connection lingered quietly beneath everything. In the background, memory continued forward. carrying traces of those winters into whatever came next. Christmas 50 years ago in America was not defined by spectacle or excess, but by shared rhythm, familiar rituals, and time allowed to unfold naturally. If this reflection stirred something quiet in you, the next film waiting on your screen goes deeper into those winters of the 1970s, into moments, textures, and details that reveal even more about